Do we have any people joining us?
I don't think so. I think it's just us.
Oh, well, Kathy Lewis is paying attention, so don't. So
where's
remember, she's listening. So,
Oh.
hi, Kathy. So, hi, Mary. Mary Bounds is with us too. So, okay, so I'm pulling up my agenda here. John, you want so. We don't have a lot to do here. John is going to introduce the RFP process, and we have some sample RFPs that he pulled together. And then we'll talk about the draft RFP, which I think should also, if we can do the survey before we do the draft RFP, just so we make sure we.
Yeah, and I don't actually have a formal draft RFP. I was going to go through the components of a few of the sample RFPs. And then from there, based on the feedback from the survey, based on the conversation today, within just a few days, we'll draft the RFP and send it back to the committee for review. If that's okay.
Yeah, and if we could perhaps, I guess what I was thinking is that we would look through these example RFPs and just your thoughts on how that's the work, then look at the survey, and maybe we could just, in terms of drafting it, we just draft some bullet points of things that we want included in what sections. And I don't know if people can pull up the examples, or if you want, how best do you think to introduce this? I don't know if everybody.
Sure. If you're comfortable, Dr. Baker, I'm happy to kind of just walk through kind of just a quick reminder, similar to what I presented before the board, just kind of what are some of the core elements of strategic planning. This won't take but a few minutes. Okay. And then I'm going to reference the 3 samples and which ones I think are the strongest that are like to kind of pull apart and maybe merge a few of them together. I think make a lot of sense.
Okay.
And then from there, we can go into the survey questions. And then I'm just going to listen, take notes, and I am very comfortable. I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. This has been done. The samples we have are good examples. We are going to, of course, customize it and do it the Grand Rapids way based on that input from board members in this conversation. So
before you start, John, could you, just in terms of, I'm not sure that everybody on this meeting are clear, what is the scope of the overall work that we're hoping to do? So, I mean,
that's also part for
yeah, I know it is part of it, but
what
is the administration expecting? So I know facilities, kind of to some extent, a transformation plan like strategic planning, which included some facilities, but.
Yeah. So I'd liken it back. Our most successful strategic planning process was the GRPS transformation plan of 2012. You might recall when then Superintendent Weatherall Neal came in, we conducted an independent audit by Cambridge. We did an extensive listening tour. There were surveys, there were town halls, there were focus groups with multiple internal, external stakeholders. And in the end, that led to the transformation plan version 1.0. Then we had public meetings and hearings, then it went to 2.0. And in the end, it was version 3.0 that was unanimously approved by the board, unanimously approved by the city commission, the mayor, every county commissioner in Kent County, the 2 state reps, state senator, 50 different pastors, the chamber, and multiple other groups that got behind a visionary plan for what they want to see with the future of Grand Rapids public schools in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that's one of the other things to define. Is it 3 to 5 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 5 to 7 years? And there's even one of them that had a 10-year plan. Right. So I think that the timeline is something we need to look at. With the GRPS transformation plan, there were 3 priority goals. One was to invest in what's working, stop doing what's not. So that was from an academics, instruction, curricula, kind of overall look at everything from the staffing, the leadership, the facilities, the technology, what we knew worked, what we knew was not, and we kept doing over and over again, expecting different results. That it looked at achievement data, that looked at test scores, that looked at attendance rates. We looked at graduation rates. And we looked at capacity of the building, the total student population, projections, all of that data was kind of woven into that kind of first objective. Number two was invest in talent recruitment, retention, and development. And the third was to invest for stability and growth. The concept was we needed to go big all at once and then stabilize the district. At that time, we knew we had more buildings than we had kids. We knew we had done 20 years where not a single year went by that we didn't close one or more schools. So as some would liken it, the budget tail was wagging the academic dog. Decisions were being made year by year to close schools, disrupt the whole system, system-wide, district-wide layoffs every other year. So parents didn't know if their school was going to be open. They didn't know who their teacher was going to be. They didn't know who the principal was going to be. And we were in a state of churn for 20 plus years. And so conceptually we knew we had to make some tough decisions, but it was not a plan to cut and close our way back to prosperity. It was a plan that was very strategic, looking at investing for that stability and growth. And this is, if you look back, it's been almost a decade. That was the last time we closed a single school. And so there's a lot of successes that were in that plan. Obviously, I would argue that some of the priority focus, and when we go through your survey, you're going to see this sprinkled in from you and all of your colleagues, is how does equity drive every decision in this strategic plan? Knowing the board is adopting equity policy. We have the equity enrollment audit. We have purchased a number of new curricula since 2012. So assessing where do we stand with curriculum, the current state of our academic plan, what is the technology plan? Obviously, we just took virtually every Chromebook and iPad out of our buildings to go one-to-one devices. So that's something we are going to have to look at. How do we prepare for and replenish in the future? And then the different other items that could inform that research and development would be affordable housing. We know that the city of Grand Rapids needs 5,000 new affordable new housing units. A large percentage would be affordable. And we have proven success with Plaza Roosevelt, as well as some projects by Harrison Park. You know, what if any role does that play in this as we look at leveraging and maximizing the use of our facilities for not just the betterment of students, but also for the betterment of our neighborhoods and our community? Special education, disproportionality, English language learners, migrant. What are we doing to make sure we are a welcoming and inclusive district, one that aims to meet the needs of all students? And so those are just some high level examples of what the goals and really kind of desired outcomes of what this plan would begin to develop and engage stakeholders and ultimately develop what is that plan for us.
I tried to summarize real quick. And so if we could just add to whatever I missed, and this is not in order, but curriculum plan, technology plan, physical facilities, link to possible connection to housing, special education and equity across the district, and then perhaps an overall vision like the transformation plan. Yep. Did I miss anything?
No, I thought that you covered the talent portion of it. Professional development, talent retention, recruitment absolutely needs to be part of that. And you'll see that in your survey. That was very prominent. The equity focus in all decision making. Okay. But other than that, I think you captured the key points.
Well, those are some good things to start with.
So the core components of, if you don't mind, Dr. Baker, I'm just going to keep going. So the things that to look for based on research is a strategic plan. It forces us to define, organize, and document the requirements and expectations. It should be a concise, well-written, well-conceived, and very transparently distributed for stakeholders to see the intent of the board and the administration in the strategic planning process. And we want to be as detailed as possible when we look at the different samples. And I'll go through kind of a little bit of all three of them, but some are a little more comprehensive than others. And I like a mix and match of some of them, but typically it would include submission details, an introduction and executive summary of kind of why the board and the administration want to conduct strategic planning, a background on the school district and the city. You might remember what you did with your superintendent search. This doesn't do it justice, but here was your profile. I could see this just getting updated a little bit with the district specifics, a little bit about our city. But these are pretty common in most of these RFP samples. The detailed specifications and the scope of service. This is where the meat and potatoes is. And then, of course, it'll be everything from defining audiences and expectations for stakeholder engagement, any terms and conditions, selection criteria. You'll see some kept it very generic, and this is what we're going to be using as general criteria. Others actually applied numbers. So when they did the ranking of the proposals, the board members are actually putting a fixed number in each of the categories. Again, consistent with what you did certainly with the superintendent search, and not altogether different than how we grade proposals. The submission guidelines and deadline for everything, and then the budget and timeline. Those are the core components of an RFP for strategic planning. If I could continue, yellows of the three that I sent.
So you're going to look at things. It looks like you're using paper, so you probably can't share paper.
I am,
I can share it.
Okay, yeah, Kim, let me give you. Oh, Craig, can you make sure Kim has?
I think I can.
Okay.
I already have it.
Okay, great.
You guys see it?
Yep, that's great. Okay. Thanks, Kim. Appreciate you. So this is the Washington Unified School District. And I like parts of this one. I like the scope of service portion of it. So once you start at the top where it just says background, you'll see here is kind of pretty standard up language about background on the district. The next line was about the city of West Sacramento, excuse me. The next gets into the purpose of the strategic plan. Then the next is in general instructions, and this is pretty high level stuff that we'll fill in the back end. But on page 3, Roman numeral 3 is their scope of services. And you'll see they simply did bullet points. And I could see, I kind of wrote down a blend of the Yellow Springs and this scope of service, just because I thought the two had the most meat and potatoes behind it. That seems consistent with what board members answered in the survey. And of course, what we would do is bullet point out or paragraph out, whichever you prefer, to list the scope of services. If you keep going below scope of services, it gets into the proposal must identify kind of key components, the deliverables, and then the contents for the proposal. And this is pretty boilerplate language. They all have very similar language on that. Our standard purchasing and RFP process, we'd incorporate that language in our draft to you. And then if you go to the last page, their selection criteria, they list criteria, but they did not put a dollar amount. Like there's not dollar amount, points, I'm sorry. They simply said the selection criteria will include, but is not limited to the following. And that really gives certainly a little more broad discretion for the ad hoc subcommittee and the board to evaluate. And I think, that's going to be a determination if you want to create a point system, or if you want to keep it generic like this, and then have that as part of a final selection process.
Yeah, we should think about that as we go through. I mean, to some extent, applying different point systems is fairly arbitrary for us since we're not used to doing this. But we could apply like 10 points each or the same. So that way we would consider, but.
Yeah, well, if you'll see of the two of the three, they did not put a point system. It was Pittsburgh Public Schools that did the point system. So you're now in Yellow Springs. Thank you again, Kim, for pulling that up. The introduction is really like similar to the background of what we saw in the Washington
This looks
Unified.
like Lake Wobegon. Is this Lake Wobegon? One of the most educated and beautiful communities. So anyway.
You'll see the difference there is that they spell out the project scope and scope of work. As I said before, I like the combination of the scope of work with Yellow Springs. You'll see Yellow Springs gets into the core areas of examination that includes curriculum, finances, facilities, partnerships, and then they talked about wanting to take into consideration the diverse student population based on race, ethnic, culture, socioeconomic, and then expand the scope of work will include research on exemplar models of public education, the development of a comprehensive 10-year plan. There's just a little bit further, but then it talks about proposal for new programs or leveraging existing programs, financial modeling, which would be including enrollment projections, and technology. And so in many ways, they start to kind of, that list that I rattled off and that Tony, you kind of piggyback, that's kind of embedded in this Yellow Springs example. That's where I could see a similar alignment based on what I've already heard earlier and based on what I'm seeing on your survey responses. And stop me if I'm moving too fast. You'll see they have their deliverables, they have their minimum requirements, and they kept it pretty high level. What like materials to be submitted is certification that they wouldn't discriminate, a comprehensive description of the planning process they're recommending to the board, examples of previous experience, examples of ability to develop a successful solution, a description approach of communications planning and how to do that community engagement, and then a very detailed timeline at the end.
I have a question. So during the superintendent search, it was hard to, like, we were looking at other districts that we felt like they were headed in the direction we wanted to head in, but that it was helpful, but it was also hard to say, like, okay, are we going after their soup? Like, you know, we see the work that you're done, but it's hard to pinpoint from where you guys are now, how do we identify a person like that can help? But in this situation, would it be helpful for us to pinpoint districts who are doing the work that we want to do, who are headed in the direction we want to head in, and find out if they were working with certain people who help them with the strategic plan or certain firms? Like, I feel like when we get responses, you know, everyone, well, most times we've seen bad applications and bad responses, but everyone looks good. You know, they can speak really highly of the work that they've done. But I would love to cut through some of that fray immediately and be like, you know, DC school district has made, you know, immense strides.
Christian, I appreciate that. And I think that was one of the things I wanted to ask about too, was we, you know, in the survey responses from the handful that we received, wanting to look at an aspirational strategic plan that looks at other mid-sized to larger urban districts that have gone through similar transformations successfully. And so I think what we can do, and I don't have that in front of me, but between a number of our foundation friends and consultants that have worked very closely with the district, like the National Equity Project, how do we look to see other and other cities? There are other mid-sized cities to larger cities that are, you know, gaining state and national attention similar to Grand Rapids. So how do we look in there to see what they've done and who they've used. I reached out after City Manager Mark Washington had suggested we contact Austin ISD. They have just gone through their own strategic planning process. They're dealing with a lot of similar issues that we are with, the number of facilities versus number of kids, gentrification, affordable housing, service to high poverty, high need students, a large percentage of English language learners. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And as we look to develop that targeted list, how do we go beyond just the normal posting of an RFP?
Yeah, it's kind of like if we create something that we can share with our contacts and other places, it's kind of hard to know how to go backwards. Like the transformation plan wasn't created by a firm.
No.
So we would leave out the Grand Rapids of the world that was created. So, but I think that this time we need an outside viewpoint perspective.
I'm also wondering if, since we are part of XQ and looking at innovation of high schools and curriculum and thinking into the future, if perhaps there are some advice or kinds of resources that they might be able to lend to us as we're looking at some of these pieces.
That's a great suggestion. And they have been nothing but, in all our reality, the reason that equity enrollment audit came about was because our friends at XQ said, hey, we love what you're doing in Grand Rapids. You should come out to this conference with all the big dogs and learn about unified enrollment and what they're doing to ensure more equity and access to schools. And that's what led to that's led us to meet the consultant that led us down this pathway. And they've been an asset all along. And I think we have other examples of organizations that are doing work across the country with similar innovation and success.
So it sounds like we want to write this RFP to make sure it's open for advising from different sectors or different kinds of relationships. So just in terms of this, and we got, you wanted to show us one more, but.
I was just going to pause on the timeline here. If you'll look here, the average, it's pretty common and somewhat it's typically about a 6-month process. You'll see theirs was just about 6 months exactly. And I think that's going to be part of what, as I started to kind of try to take this and map out some potential dates, I'd like to kind of walk through you all with that at some point as well to see if we're in the wheelhouse of what you're thinking on timeline. And if you want, I can kind of go through that while this is on the screen.
Yeah, this is good if you can leave this. So it looks like the selection process took longer than the work. So once the firm was chosen in this group, October 2010, the presentation of the plan was done by December. So
I think it would. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say they took 1 month to get the RFP done, and then they took 5 months to get the rest of the process implemented with final approval in January.
And it looks like only 2 or 3 weeks for the proposals to come in.
That's correct. That was going to be one of my questions here is, do you want to look at 2 or 3 weeks? It could be either February 26th or potentially March 1. You have a board meeting on March 1 where you could at least talk about and publicly reveal the proposals. Week of March 1 could be ad hoc committee meets to review, and then potentially March 8th, that's your work session. That could be a potential for when you interview the firms, and could even potentially vote on the firms that day, unless you wanted to wait to your March 15th board meeting. And this was just me spitballing based on this timeline, having not had a single conversation with you all. I'm just throwing it out there.
So where does, just in terms of this, where does, because this seems like a quick turnaround from the RFP to the selection, unless there's entities out there where people go to look for these things. And so I'm assuming that there are, and are there professional associations that people go to these listings?
Yes, there are multiple, and that's where I think what I'd like to do a little bit more research on that. But yes, there are. I mean, there is a K-12 association of like strategic planning. There are the National Association of School Administrators, National Association of School Boards. But then if you think about even locally here, you have firms that may not have a lot of experience in K-12 strategic planning, but you do have quite a few firms in even Michigan and West Michigan that do strategic planning. And I think that's going to be the real question mark, is how far and wide. Do you want it to be a firm that has K-12 experience? Do you want it to be a firm that has Grand Rapids experience? Like that'll be part of your selection criteria. But I think it's kind of both a broad-based search, meaning that we hit the usual listservs and the postings and advertising, but then we also very intentionally target it to those school districts, to those firms that are in the aspirational districts, that are mid-size urban districts or possibly larger, where we've seen innovation and success in the goal areas that you're hoping to advance.
Yeah, that sounds like a great criteria, but go ahead, Christian.
I'm sorry. I want to revisit something Dr. Baker was saying, or I think it was probably both of you, Dr. Baker and Hemholt, about needing people who have expertise in different sectors. So I'm just not sure how that works. But I do think that we're going to need, I would love to see us have a team that's put together that really has, yes, equity is forefront, but the issues, the disparities that we see stem from that are based on our reliance, like not really having funding. So year to year hoping for, funding. And so for the last year, and I think as long as I'm on this board, I've just been the biggest advocate of like, how do we create income streams ourselves? How do we leverage what we have? I would love for that to be a part of this process, looking at other districts who have done it. And we even heard of some in this state when we were going through the information from the audit. But then so equity itself has so many branches that no one professional, will have the answers to all the different areas. And I know that not even our one strategic plan will have all the answers, but I'm just hoping that we can come back with a team that at least has some diversity in their knowledge and in their experience. And so even also a team who we couldn't go call a district and say, we want your superintendent, but we can say we want who helped you, spearhead this work. So really a team who has that and they're able to call a couple of key districts and make those connections is really what I'm hoping for. But I just wonder if posting on, because I know that posting on boards won't get us that.
Right. We're going to have to be intentional about searching those out.
Yeah, I feel a little bit better about this than a superintendent, because we can actually look at these people's work. So if they say they helped Yellow Springs create an innovation plan, we can see what happened in Yellow Springs the last 10 years and find out if they got any better. Maybe they're not the most educated anymore. We can come down to criteria, and that will be something that maybe just the full board ends up doing when we decide. I think that we need to have a firm that knows a lot about what lots of school districts look like. And so, you know, a firm that has experience with K-12 seems pretty important to me because I'd like to do it. And I think that at the issue of equity, there's also regional equity do the schools that we offer, are they equitable compared to schools in the region? And so therefore we need to know people that know what schools in the region look like or what schools in our region could look like if they're from somewhere else. But actually in terms, let's go back to the timeline. I'd like to work backwards rather than working forwards. Is there an idea of when it would be best to have this plan completed?
So this is the COVID challenge, right? So in an ideal scenario, most strategic planning would be aligned with your annual budgeting process. So that similar to what you see here with Yellow Springs, is that you kick it off in July and then it's done in January. So then your budgeting, staffing, all that's going to inform your budget was determined and really led based on your strategic plan. During a normal year, that's kind of how it would happen, because we need, if there are going to be changes in school facilities, programs, staffing, anything like that, that would have to be built into the budget process. There are obviously collective bargaining agreements and employee groups impacted potentially. And so we need to be sensitive to those timelines. And I think that's going to be the real question is, do we have the luxury of waiting to do that so it's aligned for potentially next year, or do you want to advance it now through June, knowing that then that would give you time, a whole year's planning time to do additional engagement and to then incorporate it into your budget?
I'm wondering if is it silly to make the process a little bit longer just to make sure that we, engage all stakeholders in this process and make sure we do a really good job with that? And kind of tied in with that is finding a firm that has some experience or innovative ideas of how they might gather input given COVID restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about, I'm assuming a firm spends a lot of time in buildings and with staff, and it just doesn't look the same right now. It's hard to imagine crowded classrooms right now when there's only a third of the kids in any room. And so I would be in favor. And it also just seems to me that, I think that I'd like to have administration guidance on this, is that is it really feasible to make next year's budget, fiscal year 21-22's budget decisions based on a strategic plan that we start in March?
No.
Seems like.
No, he's saying the next year.
So
right?
It seems like
Yeah.
we could have a product. Again, it seems like if we had something in like October, November, or even December, and then a public response to it in January, February, and March, then it could be implemented for the 22-23 budget year. And also that would be, the other kind of beauty of this is the timing with the transformation plan, is that if we made this a 2030 plan, just like in a way the transformation plan was a 2020 plan, so 2012 to 2020, now we're restarting, and so we could do like an 8-year plan that would begin implemented in 22, that would prepare us to be the district that we want to be, by 2030. And it would be
one feedback I'd provide. I think I like him and Dr. Baker, the as I tried to kind of wedge this, just as I was running the dates, it feels too compressed.
Right.
It feels like we're going to have a hard time really getting everyone to focus. And so, you know, if you stretch the process, that provides for even more engagement, more authenticity, more feedback. And the only thing that I would want to check with Dr. Roby in finance, I think we would probably want to shoot for a December finalization. That's exactly when we approved the transformation plan. And that gave plenty of time to be doing the budgeting starting in January. So I'd want to double check with Larry Oberst on that timeline, but that would provide for kind of the initial engagement planning leading up to the end of the school year, some creative engagement in the summer, and then when school starts, re-engagement at that time. We want, again, this is what the consultant's going to bring back to you with recommendations, but that way you have even more time, more engagement, and more opportunity to do research and development.
Right. And
Yeah,
real,
that's what I was kind of thinking, John. I mean, when you were talking prior to Tony talking, I was picturing that this would be rolled out in 2022. And I feel like, you know, getting all of the input in, almost like on this, the one that we're looking at, adoption of it in January or December. Because, I mean, come January, you're talking like kindergarten roundup. You would have to
That's
know
right.
if there's some big things that are going to change for preschool and kindergarten and that kind of stuff.
That's correct. And I would also add, as you remember, that we, you know, the equity enrollment audit kind of, I want to say cart in front of horse, but it was originally intended to run parallel and or you know, feed into the strategic plan. And a huge part of that is unified enrollment. And how do we begin to transition to unified enrollment where there's no longer a separate application process for theme schools, that we're doing all for one and one for all, and following what we've seen successfully done in school districts like Denver and others. And that, you know, that typically that window for those opens in January. So all the more kind of going back to what you just said, Kim, if we kind of do that October, November, December, or maybe even early January, that should be enough time to implement those items. But that's one again, this is maybe a go slow to go fast kind of planning with this ad hoc committee, where we can dive in a little bit deeper and get a little bit more information as to what makes the most sense from a finalization and realistic implementation for the following school year budget. And it's not just budget, it's staff, budget, everything.
You know, if we're looking at even just what we learned in terms of experience, what we've just been through in executing a transformation plan, and some of the hiccups we saw or changes that needed to be made in terms of what was proposed and then to be either reassessed. There's a lot of insights that we gain from that we can look going forward. Especially, I like, Dr. Baker, what you said in terms of 2030, where it gives us a chance to really roll it out and see significant advances as we go forward, especially with many changes that we're experiencing in both as a district and certainly as a nation. There's a lot of stuff that's happening simultaneously that is going to impact schools in significant ways. And so I like the fact that we're going to take a significant time to look at the pieces so that we can really get the momentum that we need that's going to carry us.
So if we work backwards and just thinking of it and looking at this timeline, if we did January 2022 as adoption, I'd like to have like a 2-month period between presentation of draft and final. That way the public would have a real chance to push back on it. So maybe using this language here in November of 2021, presentation of draft plan.
Strategic. I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Because we have the time, since we're starting right now, and the possibility of lengthening this process compared to what other districts have done, I'm wondering if December instead of January would be better, just because once it's presented and adopted, if we adopt it in December, then we have a whole month before the big things like theme school application, preschool, kindergarten need to happen. It just gives us a month to process it.
I get that. The one, and I don't know exactly how the firms is. The reason I thought January, one is to have a 2-month response, which I think is important. And if we did December, then the draft is given to us in October.
Yeah.
And
yep.
But I'm thinking that no one is going to be able to see what a regular classroom looks like in Grand Rapids until September. Otherwise, we're doing strategic planning by Zoom. That's why I was thinking that January instead of December. I like December better. It makes sense. The problem is that do the firms need to be visiting schools while they're in session?
Well, and I guess my question would be is, could they be visiting schools and doing engagement in even May, but then again, start of school in August, September with a draft plan in October, which is actually the similar timeline we did with the transformation plan.
Well, I think I think that's possible, John. And I also think that it's up to them to tell us how they're going to do it. We tell them we want them to be in the classrooms when there's kids before they present us with a draft. We tell them what we want. They're going to tell us how they're going to make that happen.
Yeah, they could do all kinds of facilities discernment over the summer. They can interview staff and administrators over the summer.
Yeah, and
maybe they don't need
summer is perfect for having community involvement, because if we're dealing with COVID stuff, we can be outside. I mean,
yeah, so if that timeline works, so then if we go back to the beginning, if we're not needing a product until December, then when should we start? When should we put the RFP out? I'm okay with putting it out in March 8th. I don't know if we need to have the responses back by then. That way we can give a whole month for people to.
We could shoot for responses after spring break.
Yeah, it seemed like something like that happened when we got stuff after spring break.
Maybe we could vote on the RFP on March 1st and then ask for responses by, I don't know, whatever the Friday of, the Monday of spring break or something. That way we have a chance to get before that next meeting.
And then isn't the suggestion for schools to be in session in March sometime or something like that, where you would have
well, the governor is advocating that all school districts provide some form of in-person instruction for kids in pre-K through 12. So that doesn't necessarily mean by then we'll be 100% in person. In fact, it's still likely we will have a hybrid in-person model at minimum through spring break. I shouldn't say this. I don't want to speculate. As of right now, we are following current guidance that would lead us to believe hybrid in-person through the remainder of the marking period, potentially through the remainder of the semester, which would be for the remainder of the school year. But they are, you're starting to see social gathering restrictions are gradually being lifted. So there may be a means by which to do some stakeholder engagement in person as well as virtual, yet this, spring to early summer.
So we could have the firm begin the work, like the 1st of May.
So what if you had your works, what if on April 12th, which is the Monday after spring break, that's your work session where you could actually do the interviews. And then a week later, you identify the firm potentially, and I'm just talking out loud.
We would need to have a time to narrow the proposals, right?
Well, this is a little off that timeline, but remember that an email did just go out about board retreat at the end of March. So the timeline is a little bit different, but it would be great if we could take some retreat time. I mean, clearly it's not my agenda, but we'll all be together for an extended period of time that day, even though that day isn't locked in yet though.
Why don't we say we can ask Jen if April 12th is an appropriate date to do interviews, and then she can decide at what point we review the RFPs. Now, if it's the board retreat, we would need the proposals back by that date, rather than the beginning of April.
We might be able to narrow it down without having a meeting too. Like individually look at them, you
I
know.
wonder how many, actually, if we can come up with a process for choosing via email, that might be better, because we could end up in really long meetings to discuss.
Mhm.
Well, and then would you want to do an ad hoc committee before the board retreat? So the committee does the preliminary
That
review
would be
of the
nice.
applications,
That
right?
would make sense.
Why don't we could say that this committee chooses 5 firms, and then the board could choose 3 of the 5 to interview or something? Or if you think we should just choose all of the interviewees?
I think the full board will be more behind it if they're at least a part of that narrowing down piece.
Okay, so maybe we should choose a number, 5 or 6, and then they can choose the final 3.
I think that sounds good.
Yeah.
So as I read that a little bit, so it could be, so sometime end of March is your retreat. Ad hoc meets before to review the applicants, discussion at the board retreat about it, and then April 12th, your work session could be interviews with the finalists.
Okay.
And even if we don't have, say for instance, by that board retreat, we don't have all the applications to review, depending on how this timeline actually measures up, we could still request some time during that retreat for this ad hoc committee to just update the full board on the process, the direction, what we're looking at as like key things, especially if we're going to want people to analyze things on their own later. We should still have one time, before narrowing down in interviews to engage the full board. And I think it's a little bit of a liability thing for this smaller group as well. No matter what happens throughout the process, we know it's going to be great, but we want everyone's buy-in so nobody's like, you 5, you 4 made these decisions and missed these things. So at some point, I'd like to find time for full discussion.
Okay. I think I kind of have, at least on based on this conversation, I have enough to be able to put together the draft of the timeline, and then I want to get into the survey results here too. But just having listened to this conversation, at least to this point, I'm starting to kind of get what I think I need to begin to draft something. I don't know if we want to shift into
let's do that.
Survey.
Yeah. And we could see if there's more, but I think that your bullet points captured kind of the scope. So
okay. The one thing I wanted to just, well, let's see if I just wanted to note that on the Pittsburgh is where they had the evaluation criteria on the very last page. If you look at the points, that's where the point system is.
Yeah.
Just in case, I'm not overly impressed with this proposal, by the way, but that's just my own opinion. I kind of see a blend of the Yellow Springs and the Washington, and maybe something else if I find it. But I think we got enough here to begin to get you a draft once we go through the survey results.
Yeah, this isn't too bad because it does get it just kind of key 4 or 5 things that are most important to us. Background and experience, rather than putting 10 points on curriculum plan, 10 points on technology plan or whatever. But I mean, we can put equity, background, design, innovation.
I mean, part of me worries about doing a point system. I feel like if we have, if we all agree as a board on what's really important to us, if we start doing the point system, now we have to have a discussion about who thinks what's more important and agree on all of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That
Well,
seems
we get to write the
tedious.
RFP, so it's just the 4 of us for the RFP. So, yeah, I agree, and I think that in the end, people will have strong feelings about one firm over another firm, and the points won't matter. So, but I do
That's
like.
what I was gonna say. The points will be a good starting place if we decide to use it. It makes things easier for people as they're trying to synthesize the process. So I'm not totally against it, because especially if we're telling people go through this stack, you know, and we've been going through a lot of stacks. So that makes it easier. But honestly, whenever we get together as a full board, and I think it's really good, we're able to just have a converse, like we're able to just get to the conversation. But I don't think the points are a bad place for people to start.
Okay.
Let's look at the surveys.
All right. I've kind of taken the liberty of just summarizing points of each of the 7 questions. So there were 5 respondents. And if you're okay, I'm just going to go one by one and kind of give the high level points. Of course, you all have received these, and so you'll see it's consistent. But unless you prefer that I approach this otherwise, I think going step by step, you're going to see a lot of consistency, a lot of uniformity.
It would seem like very consistent. I couldn't even tell which one I wrote, even though it was pretty clear to me which one I wrote. So
right. So the first question is, what are your current perceptions of the district? Felt like we are on the brink of the next growth phase, and then we've been in this state of transition for a while. And so I kind of sensed that language was a little bit of felt like there's some momentum that was lost after we were gaining it for the better part of the last 8 years. Current significant and important reinvestment is needed. Inequities in facilities, comprehensive middle and high schools are really struggling. Fear that we may not get students back if we've got to make some tough decisions with how many schools we have. And then concern that we may have lost some ground in progress toward diversity of teacher and administrative staff. Those were kind of the current perceptions of the 5 respondents, which are, I don't know who actually filled it out. I just know that the answers. I'm gonna pause for just a second. Any comments? All right, I'm gonna keep going. Number 2 was, what is your vision for the future state of the district? Vibrant, rigorous, deeply connected to community and culture, equity, language, arts, athletics, college career infused, inherent belief that each and every child is capable of exceptional outcomes, state-of-the-art facilities, more advanced placement in early middle college, equity, recruitment, retention of students and talent. Equity is the center of all decisions in every area of GR, which will help attract and retain more families and staff, and improve the overall reputation of the district. Number 3, what are your expectations of the strategic planning process? well-defined, metric-based, clear process and timeline, comprehensive listening and engagement, learn from where other districts are, best practices that contributed to their success from similar like-sized districts, transparent, inclusive, equitable, involving a large number of internal and external stakeholders, priority focusing on students and parents. Number 4 was, what are your expectations for the engagement of internal, external stakeholders? Grand Rapids is rooted in partnerships for good or for bad. Capture voices of internal and external stakeholders to ensure there's a sense of ownership and voice in the process and in the final recommendations. Parents of current students, strong building leaders and teachers wanting to be intentional with those specific role groups, diverse ethnic representation from strong equity-minded staff and parents, whose voice isn't being heard. How can we intentionally reach hard to reach populations in an authentic manner? That may mean not doing it the way it's normally done. Multiple platforms, multiple engagement opportunities, outside of the box, outside of the sit and get traditional strategic planning. Inclusivity of all populations and their advocacy service groups. Number 5 is identify 2 to 3 stakeholders to be engaged. GRCC, City of Grand Rapids, city elected officials, Latinx representation, Hispanic Center, Hispanic Chamber, Randall Jelks, Carlos de la Barrera, NAACP, Urban League, families who left the district, family of current students, families in district who have kids that are not yet school aged. So baby carriages and really looking to those next generation of families who we need to recruit to be part of the GRPS family. And then parents, students, teachers, staff, and the Board of Education. Number 6 was, what consideration should drive the proposal selection process? Experience with mid-sized urban districts focused on equitable outcomes and evidence of successful implementation. Understanding of importance of authentic, intentional, comprehensive, and robust listening and engagement. Board included at all stages of the process. A firm that understands our district and constituency. A firm that will be open, honest, and challenge the board and the administration. A clear time frame, knowledge of district, experience with similar districts, clear process that stresses transparency, inclusivity, and equity. Don't skimp on the money, get the best, and experience in high performance reputation. Those were kind of the key answers. And then lastly, we had just a few additional comments. One was, again, worried about the potential of closing schools and upsetting more families, and advocate for traditional and non-traditional models of participation in the input process to ensure all communities participate. For me, that almost writes the RFP itself. I see the scope of work. I see expectations on engagement. So I think that your voice is well represented in this, that could rather easily be incorporated into an RFP.
So that does help you write. And it's, yeah, that's a good, I'm glad you did that survey. I think it helps to also provide board ownership over it too. But I am impressed with, when I read it this afternoon, I was impressed by how much we share. There isn't much dissent. You know, we all kind of know where the district is at and want it to improve.
John, did you feel like there was anything, like, as you go to write a sample, do you feel like there's any questions that you didn't get answered from that?
No, not really. I think, no, I mean, I think we can, at the front end of this conversation, of this meeting, you know, there were kind of what I call the research and findings portion of strategic planning. And that gets into those big buckets around finance, facilities, enrollment, academic, curricula, tech plan. Those are, I didn't hear as much necessarily in these questions, but I think it's almost inherent that that's what we would do. So I kind of like to take a blend of what I heard here, what we discussed earlier, and then again, if you look at what Yellow Springs did under their scope of work, where they had the core areas of examination. I think that is essentially saying what we just said, is our core areas of examination are going to be around our academics, our curricula, our talent, equity, facilities, finance, some of those core elements that are really going to inform your strategic plan. If you recall the transformation plan, we had the phase 2 building improvement plan, we had the academic plan, we had the Cambridge audit, you had the listening tour results, and I feel, there was a strategic plan that was done in 2008. And so you had a couple different elements of work that was already done that were incorporated into the overall planning, strategic planning process. And so as the one thing I'd want to call out a little bit more and intentionally is those how we're ensuring the services for all students, with emphasis on high needs, high poverty, special education students, English language learners, migrant, refugees. I think knowing kind of the board's commitment to inclusivity and equity, as well as the work we've done with the Welcome Grand Rapids process, I think being able to be very intentional in specifying some of that as part of the research and part of this planning.
Yeah, I was just looking at that paragraph. That's why I pulled it up. I like number 1, how I don't know how they put how students learn, how they are evaluated, how teachers will teach, and how they will be evaluated. Yeah, which is what you were kind of talking about, that paragraph, correct?
Yep, absolutely. And it doesn't have to, it could be bulleted or could be done in a paragraph. I think I want to kind of just start writing it and see what looks and feels the best. And then obviously we'll bring it back to you all, and you can wordsmith and pull and push and pull.
And the other thing I was going to throw out there is policy committee just put together a draft policy that obviously needs to be presented to the board still for the equity policy. And it might be beneficial for you to just look at the draft too. Might help you fill in this core areas of examination.
Okay.
The other thing too is, and I'm sure that I know that we talked about it, but one of the key areas is class size, and that gets into a whole lot of other areas. But how do kids learn best? And challenging ourselves to look at those areas seriously. So if class size, small class size would get us to, catapult academic achievement, how would that be possible as we're looking strategically into the future? So in other areas around those pieces, certainly, teacher shortage, substitute teaching, growing our own, just all of those kinds of things. But if we don't limit ourselves to saying, gosh, we have to have large class size because our budget, blah, 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 but really saying, if we're looking to 2030, and we're looking to gaining back folks, is this an area that we need to strategically look at and work towards, or something like that? However that might look at our strategic planning.
Yeah, if I would summarize that survey and really where we're all at, I think, is that we don't want a plan that celebrates who we are. We want a plan that tells us what we should be. And so, and I think that even with the stakeholder list, which was it was the one thing that was kind of all over the place of the ones you mentioned, it was basically saying these people need to be good at finding out the people in the know, people who care, the people who are making decisions. And if that's and in my experience, there's leaders in the community that tell you what they think, but then I was the one that mentioned Carlos de la Barrera. I'm fortunate to get to know him because I'm working at Southwest. He's a great person that knows a lot about what that community needs for education, but he's not going to be known by the board. But there's probably hundreds of those people who are like that. So we want a firm that's innovative with finding the right stakeholders.
Well, and that's one thing, Dr. Baker, I think we did quite successfully, and we have a master list that I can even bring to one of the next ad hoc committees and say, here are all the employee groups, here are all of our community partners. We did one-on-ones, we did small group, we did large group, we did surveys. I mean, it was, and that's also going to be part of what this.
That's true. Yeah,
we're going to be asking this consultant to push for us. But I think that was probably one of the successes, is that everyone felt engaged. Like, I mean, to get unanimous approval of a plan that ended up closing 10 school buildings all at once, including a high school, I think speaks to leadership, speaks to the board and this community and the administration kind of uniting. And how does this process that we're embarking on and this RFP really set the stage for us to have that level of success? So come December, this community is bought in. We had energy, we had excitement, there was momentum. Even though we were closing schools, I think there was clarity around what the plan was, why it was, and why that needed support. So I think that's where we're headed.
So you got enough to this. Should we give you a deadline and then plan a second meeting?
Sure. I mean, I can have something by the end of this week. I could have something by tomorrow. Whatever. I mean,
nobody will read it till the end of the week anyway. So how about then when should what's the earliest that this group would like to come back together? Do you want to meet before the 6:30 meeting on the 1st?
I'd love that. I mean, this is just, again, my opinion, but the more we kind of keep this thing moving, I think the more likely it is we're going to hit the deadlines and stay on track. So I'm comfortable as early as February 1st.
So, and what we would be doing is just we would be reviewing over the weekend the RFP that you send us, and then just making any suggested changes. And then if we did it that way, we could do a 5:30 meeting on the 1st and have that done before the regular meeting starts. I'm going to want to limit our meetings that start at 7. So.
Mr. Chairman, I am not going to comment on that.
Hey, tomorrow you make sure that Larry Oberst knows it's his responsibility.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez. So,
well, okay. If I get you the RFP on Friday in advance, or even sooner than that, then that should give some time for even individual emails that I can tweak and bring a final version there. It shouldn't take us more than an hour to go through that.
Why don't people plan on doing that they can just reply, not reply all, but hit reply to John with their editorial suggestions. And then maybe on Monday, it won't be that much. We won't have to do that much.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
Another thing that I really love when it comes to editing documents with the group is just throwing it in a Google Doc. And that way we can all make suggestions. We can see what suggestions other people have made. So if you highlight, it'll let you on the side just put a note of what you're suggesting, but then it's a working doc and we all can see what the other committee members are suggesting, and it'll be one place for John instead of going through a bunch of different emails.
John, could you check with Sharon and make sure that that's not deliberation?
Yeah.
Or should we just do it and then not and pretend we didn't know?
Well, if we think it's deliberation, yeah.
I'll check with Sharon, but
yeah,
I don't.
check.
It doesn't.
First I've heard that.
It's not like we're voting.
Yeah, I don't think it would be deliberation, and it's not a quorum in there, but we can always just double check. And if she says no.
Make sure, like, obviously ask Sharon, but make sure you don't comment on somebody's suggestion. Because then it's deliberating. Like if you
Right.
say, I don't like what you said, it doesn't sound quite right.
So we can save all of that for the actual meeting,
Correct.
but
Yeah.
we can just put we'll double check with Sharon, but perhaps we just put our input in the doc.
Maybe we could just put comments
point.
and not do any editorial changes. So no rewriting, but just comments on the side.
Right.
I'm good with that. I think I can try to get to the expectations of our 14-year-olds working on a Google Doc. So anyway. Okay, John, can you let Julie know to schedule the 5:30 meeting next week, or should I?
Yep. No, it's actually already on my calendar. So, but I will remind
Yeah, it's
everyone.
on mine.
It's on yours too. Okay, good. So that worked out perfect.
Okay, all right, great.
John, Reverend, you got it on yours?
Yep, I got it on mine.
Perfect. Kim?